Hello, my friends. Settle in and stay with me for a little while. Tonight, we are stepping into the life of a man who turned words into ladders for millions of people. Take one slow breath and let the story begin. Picture a poor boy in the mountains of Virginia, restless, grieving, and rough around the edges. His mother is gone, the family cabin is small, the future feels even smaller, and almost nobody looking at him would guess that one day his ideas would travel across the world, into homes, offices, train stations, and tired hearts. At that moment, nobody could imagine that this lonely mountain child would become one of the most famous voices in the history of success. But there is something else here, something stranger. Even now, more than a century later, people still argue about what in his story was hard fact, what was polished legend, and what was a dream he spoke so often that the world began to believe it. His name was Napoleon Hill, the author most closely linked to Think and Grow Rich, the book that quietly sat in the hands of workers, dreamers, salesmen, students, and strugglers for generations. His life matters not only because he inspired millions, but because his story is full of hunger, reinvention, ambition, and contradiction. And when we follow that story from the beginning, we do not just meet a famous writer. We meet a man who kept knocking on closed doors until the sound of the knocking itself became his legacy. Napoleon Hill was born in 1883 in a one-room cabin on the Pound River in Wise County, Virginia. The landscape around him was beautiful, but beauty did not make life easy. This was Appalachian poverty, a hard kind of poverty where work was heavy, comforts were few, and the distance between what you wanted and what you could touch felt enormous. When Hill was only 9 years old, his mother died. That loss left a cold silence in the house, and for a child, silence can feel like a storm with no sound. For a time, the boy seemed to drift toward trouble. Some accounts describe him as wild, angry, almost feral, a word that means untamed, not yet softened by discipline or care. Then his father remarried, and Hill's stepmother, Martha, entered the house. She was the widow of a school principal, and she believed the boy's energy could be redirected, turned away from noise and toward thought. Remember this woman, because in quiet biographies, these are often the people who change everything. Hill began writing very young. At 13, he was already working as a mountain reporter for small local newspapers. While many boys his age were only beginning to understand the world, he was already being paid to observe it, describe it, and turn human struggle into sentences. That mattered. A reporter learns to listen. A reporter notices the small detail, the tired hand, the proud face, the tremble in a voice. And Hill would spend the rest of his life turning observation into influence. Words became his first door. They carried him beyond the narrow valley of his birth and into a larger American story, one full of railroads, factories, money, invention, and raw ambition. The country itself was changing quickly. Steel rose. Cities grew. Fortunes appeared almost overnight. America was becoming a place where success looked bright, loud, and almost magical. To a young writer from the mountains, that world must have felt like another planet. Then came the meeting that would shape his legend. As Hill later told it, he was a young journalist when he was sent to interview Andrew Carnegie, one of the richest men in the world. Hill said the interview stretched far beyond its expected time. Carnegie, impressed by the young man, supposedly offered him a challenge: spend years studying the habits, minds, and decisions of successful people, then turn that knowledge into a philosophy ordinary people could use. And yet, historians later questioned whether the meeting happened exactly as Hill described it. That uncertainty is part of the mystery. But whether the commission was literal or partly self-created, Hill found his mission there. and what a mission it was. He began moving through circles of power, with the eyes of an outsider, and the appetite of someone who had known lack. He attached himself to stories of achievement. He listened to industrialists, inventors, executives, and public figures. He became fascinated not only by wealth itself, but by the inner machinery behind it: desire, discipline, decision, persistence. He wanted to know why some people pushed through disappointment, while others stopped at the first locked door. Can you imagine the contrast? A child from a one-room cabin asking questions about greatness in the age of American empire. A boy shaped by grief entering rooms built by money. That contrast gave Hill emotional force. He was not speaking as a man born comfortable. He was speaking as someone who had stared at distance and wanted to cross it. But this was not the end of the story. Studying success did not mean he moved through life without failure. Far from it. Hill's own path was uneven, unstable, and often full of trouble. He launched ventures that did not last. He lived through money problems. He reinvented himself more than once. And over time, critics accused him of exaggeration, fraud, and myth-making. In other words, the man who taught confidence often had to build his own life again from unstable ground. That tension matters. If we remove it, we turn him into a poster, not a person. Hill was not a perfect monument standing in clean light. He was a human being moving through shadow, sometimes brilliantly persuasive, sometimes deeply questionable, always intensely driven. And perhaps that is one reason people kept reading him. He did not write like a distant saint. He wrote like a man trying to force meaning out of chaos. In the 1920s, after years of collecting ideas and stories, he published The Law of Success. It appeared first as a large course before becoming a book, and it tried to organize success into principles people could learn and practice. Not luck, not magic. Principles. He spoke about definiteness of purpose, which means knowing clearly what you want. He spoke about the mastermind, the power of aligned minds working together. Even the language sounded bold, almost mechanical, as if success could be engineered. For many readers, that was thrilling. The modern world felt huge and impersonal. Factories, corporations, telephones, assembly lines. Everything was becoming larger than the individual. Hill offered a different feeling. He told ordinary people that their thoughts mattered. He suggested that the mind was not just a witness to life, but a tool, perhaps even a workshop. If you were poor, discouraged, or ignored, that idea could feel like a candle in a dark room. And then history raised the stakes. The Great Depression arrived. Banks failed. Jobs disappeared. Pride broke in public. Families who had done everything right still found themselves frightened. This is important, because Hill's most famous message did not rise in a time of easy optimism. It rose in a time of national pain. When people feel the floor shaking under them, they do not only need money. They need language strong enough to hold their hope together. In 1937, Hill published Think and Grow Rich. That title was sharp, memorable, impossible to ignore. It sounded almost too simple, which is one reason people still remember it. But inside the book, Hill was not only talking about money in the narrow sense. He was also talking about disciplined desire, belief, planning, persistence, and the habit of refusing defeat. Some of his ideas were practical. Some were mystical, a word that means spiritual or beyond ordinary explanation. But the overall message was clear enough for millions to carry. Your inner life shapes your outer life more than you think. The book moved because it was built for the ear as much as the eye. Hill told stories. He repeated phrases. He used rhythm. He took abstract ideas and gave them a human face. A reader did not feel he was reading a dry business manual. He felt he was being addressed personally, almost urgently. whatever the mind can conceive and believe. Hill wrote, it can achieve. Whether one agrees completely or not, you can hear why that line stayed alive. It sounds like a key turning in a lock. What happened next changed everything. Think and Grow Rich spread across decades and across borders. It passed from hand to hand. It sat in drawers, on bedside tables, in briefcases, underlined, folded, argued over, loved. It became one of the foundational books of modern self-help, long before podcasts, online courses, and motivational clips on phones. Hill had already learned how to speak to private ambition. He knew people wanted more than instructions. They wanted permission to hope. Still, success did not erase the questions around him. Parts of Hill's life remained tangled. Critics doubted major claims he made, especially about his personal history and his connection to famous men. That means his legacy comes to us in two lights at once. In one light, he is a pioneer of personal development, a man whose words helped shape the language of modern ambition. In the other light, he is a controversial figure who sometimes blurred the line between truth and performance. And yet, even that tension reveals something important. Hill understood the power of narrative before much of the modern world did. He knew people do not simply live by facts. They live by stories about who they are, what is possible, and what tomorrow might become. He sold principles, yes, but he also sold identity. He told the overlooked person, your present condition is not your final condition. Think about how powerful that message is when spoken to someone standing in the cold. There is an underdog moment here that may feel close to your own life. Maybe not in money, maybe not in business, but in effort. Maybe you, too, know what it is like to feel behind. To feel that other people began the race from a better place. To wonder whether quiet progress even counts. Hill's story, for all its complexity, carries this one steady beat: a closed door is still a door. It can still open. As the years passed, Hill kept writing and teaching. He published more works, including Outwitting the Devil, a strange and daring manuscript written in 1938, though it was considered too controversial to publish in his lifetime. That, too, tells us something about him. He did not want to sound merely sensible. He wanted to sound unforgettable. By then, his voice had become part preacher, part salesman, part philosopher, part performer. Some people found that voice electrifying. Others found it suspicious. But almost nobody found it weak. He spoke with urgency because urgency had always been his element. When a person has lived with lack, with distance, with the need to invent himself again and again, urgency becomes a native language. There is also a hidden cost in a life like his. To keep becoming, to keep persuading, to keep speaking as if the future is always just one belief away. You pay for that somewhere. Often in peace. Often in simplicity. Often in the quiet ability to stop performing and simply be. Greatness can bring applause, but applause is not rest. And the man who taught millions how to think about success may have spent much of his own life chasing stability that never stayed long. Napoleon Hill died in 1970. By then, the boy from the cabin had become a global name. That is the impossible contrast we began with. A grieving mountain child becomes a worldwide symbol of ambition. A teenage newspaper reporter learns to shape sentences so well that those sentences outlive him. A man surrounded by controversies still leaves behind phrases that continue to comfort, challenge, and provoke readers many decades later. So what is his real legacy? I think it lives in three places. First, in the practical hunger he awakened in ordinary people, the feeling that goals should be named, not hidden. Second, in the emotional force of his message, especially for those who feel stuck in small beginnings. And third, in the warning his life carries. Success language can inspire, but it can also become theater. We should admire with open eyes. Remember the cabin. Remember the silence after his mother died. Remember the young reporter learning to listen. Those early images help us understand the later voice. Hill wrote so often about desire because he knew emptiness. He wrote about purpose because he knew drift. He wrote about persistence because he knew how long distance can feel when you start far away. Maybe that is why his work still reaches English learners, dreamers, and quiet strugglers now. Maybe your own progress feels slow right now. Maybe some days the words still feel far away, and confidence comes and goes like weak sunlight in winter. But you are building something, sentence by sentence, day by day. Even if the room feels small, even if the results are not visible yet, your effort is changing you from the inside, before the world can see it from the outside. And here is what makes this remarkable: people do not need perfect heroes to move forward. Sometimes they need complicated ones. Sometimes they need someone whose life contains both light and shadow, both inspiration and warning. Napoleon Hill may not give us a clean fairy tale, but he gives us a living question: what can a human being build with belief, language, and relentless persistence? And what might that pursuit cost along the way? So tonight, as we leave his story, I want to leave you with warmth, not pressure. You do not have to become famous. You do not have to become rich. But if this story gave you anything, let it be this: small beginnings are not small endings. A rough chapter is not a final chapter. And a quiet voice, used steadily, can travel farther than anyone expects. What part of Napoleon Hill's journey stayed with you most? Did you know this story before today? Thank you for spending these calm moments with me, and I hope you will come back for another journey soon. This is Tale Wise English.